So let's try to flow into this, I think, with some definitions, and hopefully that lays a foundation for further conversation. How would you define consciousness?
Oh, that's the one I would define last, perhaps. That's the holy grail of cognitive science, trying to explain consciousness. I would point your listeners, if they want to hear a very long argument about this and presented in a dialogical manner, there's a series I have called Untangling the World Knot that I did with Greg Enriquez, which is a comprehensive attempt to give a comprehensive account of what consciousness is. Well, let me go back to the problem solving, and in this way, one of the things I want to argue is that we should try and understand these things interdefinitionally, that our definition of consciousness and our definition of intelligence will turn out to be importantly related to each other. In fact, one of the criticisms I have of some existing work in the philosophy of mind is that these two questions are separated in a way I think that is unjustifiable. So let's start at the beginning. I just thought of something. I want to add one more definition that we should talk about, which is psychotechnology, because that'll get us into distributed cognition and things like coinage and money and their effect on individual and distributed cognition. So problem solving. So again, let's go back to it. What does it mean to say? So you can see this when people, and this distinction is even emerging quite clearly now in work on artificial intelligence. We distinguish between artificial intelligence and what's called artificial general intelligence. So an artificial intelligence is basically a machine that could do something that until recently had to be done by an intelligent human being, like a bank teller. Until very recently, we had to have human beings to do that, but now we have artificial intelligence that can do that. Now, that's an important project. It's important socioeconomically. It has political and cultural ramifications. I'm not trying to disparage it. People who do that, I understand why they do that. I'm just making a distinction here because I want to talk about what's called artificial general intelligence, because that is a scientific philosophical endeavor. This is try to create artificial intelligence that is like your intelligence and my intelligence. And what is that general intelligence? Well, it means you're a general problem solver. What that means is in very many domains, you can solve very many problems. You can solve problems about learning how to swim in the water domain, and you can solve problems about how to interact with Mexican culture when you're in a museum in Mexico City. Like try to get a single machine to do that right now is incomprehensible right now. So does that give you, first of all, a general sense of the target I'm at least shooting at? Good.
Yes.
Okay, so what the work I've done, and I've been helped by a lot of people along this on this journey: Tim Lillicrap, Blake Richards, Leo Ferraro, Gary Habenhausen, just a ton of people. So I don't want to, right? And most importantly, current work I'm doing with Brett Anderson and Mark Miller. Here's my proposal, what this general ability is. And we have psychometric ways of measuring this general intelligence. So let's go back to your problem solving. So what's a general issue in almost all problems you're trying to solve? The issue that's facing you is that there is way too much information available in the environment, in you, right? And in the potential relations between what's in your long-term memory. So this is often, there's many ways people talk about this, the combinatorial explosion of information, right?
Uncertainty, right?
It's a kind of uncertainty, but you don't want to identify them because you could have each piece of information could be certain, and you could still face a combinatorial explosion of the information available to you. Gotcha. You could have limited information, and that nevertheless that information would be polluted by noise, and you would be uncertain about it. So, right? So you're right to want to question the relation between them, but I think you don't want to just readily identify them together.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So the problem is you can't search all the information. And this isn't what you can't do. You cannot check each piece of information and see if it's needed for the problem at hand. Like, so I'm trying to talk to you right now. Is that piece of the carpet right now relevant to talking to you? Well, no. It's not. Well, what if that catches on fire? Then it is.
Yeah.
Right? Is the background behind you relevant to talking to you right now? Well, a little bit. I needed to focus. What about, do you see how many things I can point to and possible patterns, right? Is there an important relationship between the temperature of the room I'm in right now and my understanding of you? Well, of course not. Well, there is if it goes up to 105 degrees Celsius, right? And so, right, you see what I'm trying to say? And so you can't check everything and say, is that relevant? Is that relevant? Is that relevant? Is that relevant?
Yes.
Because it would take you the rest of the history of the universe to do it.
Right.
So this is what fascinates me about you. And this is what I've dedicated my career to and other people. Right now, you do it like that. You zero in on relevant information.
Yeah.
And this sounds like a Zen koan. You're intelligent because you ignore most of the information.
Yes.
There's a deep connection between intelligence and a certain kind of ignorance.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing. You can't do that perfectly, because the only way to do it perfectly would be to check all the pieces of information. But you do it so well and in so many different domains that you can solve your problems and achieve your goals. I call that ability relevance realization. And I'm playing on both meanings of the word realization, right? You're becoming aware of it and it's becoming real for you.
Right.
I argue with Leo Ferraro and all these other people that general intelligence is exactly that capacity for relevance realization. That's the ability that makes you intelligent. That's the ability we're struggling to give to computers when we're trying to give them artificial general intelligence.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of debate about, is that like one simple function or is it a bunch of functions? I won't go into that right now. All I want to do is establish this idea that what we're trying to do is relevance realization.
Let me ask you.
Does that make sense?
Yes. No, it's excellent. So the relevance itself, I'll lay out some things here and then hopefully it'll frame the question. The relevance itself seems like it could only be, it has to pertain to an aim or a purpose of some kind.
Yes.
Right? The system or the intelligence needs to have some direction that it's going, that it can determine what's relevant to that aim and ignore what's not. And I love, there's actually, Peterson gave an example of this once where he says that seems to be almost the entire purpose of consciousness is to try and move things into the unconscious. Right, like if you're playing piano, maybe not the entire purpose. I may be stepping outside the boundary. One of the main functions. So if you're playing the piano, you have to pay very close attention to how you move your fingers and how you position your hands. But the entire aim of playing the piano is to be able to do it without thinking. And there's a North Whitehead quote that very closely mirrors this that you've probably heard. I think about it a lot, and he essentially saying that the conventional wisdom is we need to think before acting, but the precise opposite is true, that civilization advances with the more important operations we can perform without needing to think about them.
Yes.
And in a way, again, back to this relationship between consciousness and the market, that's what the market is trying to do as well. The market's trying to solve these problems in a way that people don't need to think about them anymore, right? When you jump in your car, turn the key and press the gas, there's a lot of complex operations taking place that the market has already solved for you that you now don't need to think. You can think about, the politics at work on your commute in versus how the combustion engine works or something like that. So, now I've kind of slid from my question there, but I was trying to just connect to this. The conscious awareness seems to be kind of like the aperture through which we're moving things into the unconscious, where we don't need to think about them as much so we can go and pursue other aims. So I guess how would that pertain to? But
I think you're putting your finger on where I want to go next, which is, and there's two things. One I'll mention and I want to follow it up with you later, is that we have to understand that when we talk about intelligence, we don't just mean individual cognition, individual problem solving. Well, I belong to what's called 4E cognitive science, embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended, right? And one of the primary ways in which we solve most of our problems, and you've just indicated it, is through distributed cognition. So a way of thinking about this is way before the internet linked computers to release the power of distributed computation, which makes this conversation possible.
Yes.
Culture linked brains, people together to release the power of distributed cognition. Almost everything we do by participating in distributed cognition.
Yes.
So I want to talk both about individual intelligence and collective intelligence. And we store things differently and solve things differently in those two domains. And one way we might think about one of the things money does is help to set up a relationship between individual cognition and distributed cognition.
Right.
So that I'd like to follow that up with you. Yes. But I want to go back to the primary point you were making. And Peterson, well, I can call him Jordan. I know him. So Jordan is right. Jordan is pointing to a feature of consciousness that Bohr and Seth have put their finger on. And so let me first put it as a question, then we'll move back towards Peterson and Bohr and Seth. Most, and this has been one of the great discoveries of modernity, especially post Freud, right, is that most of your intelligence is unconscious. Let me give you an example. You're understanding the sounds that are coming out of my face hole right now, right? How are you doing that? How are you doing that? You have no idea whatsoever.
Right.
You have and try to get a machine to do that, and you quickly understand how complex and sophisticated and intelligent the machine has to be in order to turn noises into, and we still don't have it, where it turns the noises into ideas.
Yes.
That's just one example of how most of your intelligence is unconscious. Okay?
Right.
So then the question is, why are we conscious at all? And you should stop and savor that question for a minute. Why are we conscious at all? Given that a lot of our intelligence is unconscious and a lot of our problem solving is done with distributed cognition that doesn't require an overarching unified consciousness, why are we conscious?
To deal with novelty or something?
That's great. That's basically, okay. Now note it, and that'll get us to the Peterson point, right? Notice that what you're saying is, I seem to be conscious when I have to confront a particular kind of problem. Novelty is part of it, but certainly not novel. There's lots of novel stuff again happening on around you. There's unexpected movements of certain odors through your room.
Right.
That's novel, and you don't care. You don't care, right?
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. But it's a kind of novelty. So I want you to, in order to help, I want to make a distinction. And again, let's go back to problem solving between two kinds of problems: a well-defined problem and ill-defined problem. So what constitutes a problem? A problem is when I have an initial state that is different, as you indicated a few minutes ago, from a goal state I want to be in. So for example, if I'm thirsty and I don't have water right now, that's a problem. Is that okay?
Right. Yes.
And then what I can do is I can perform operations that can change my current state into some other state. I can raise this hand, I can raise that hand, I can clap my hand, and you can start to see how combinatorial explosion can open up right away, right?
Yeah.
There's all these things I can do, right? And then what a problem solution is a sequence of operations that turn the initial state into the goal state, while following what are called path constraints. What are path constraints? Sorry, I don't mean to overload you. But remember, you're a general problem solver. You don't want to solve any one problem to the detriment of your ability to solve other problems. Jerry Fodor gives an example of somebody who wants to cook their lunch and so they burn down their house. And we don't go, wow, that's brilliant. You think, wow, that's stupid. Because although they achieved their goal, they've destroyed their ability to satisfy other goals, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a sequence of operations that turns an initial state into the goal state while obeying the path constraint. And what you're trying to do is avoid the combinatorial explosion of all the possible pathways you could pursue and all the possible information you could consult.
Right.
Okay. Now, there are problems where we have a very helpful representation of our initial state, our goal state, our actions, and our operators. So I take it for you that multiplication is a well-defined problem. If I tell you what's 3 times 12, you know what kind of problem it is right away,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You know what actions are relevant, which ones are irrelevant. Singing is irrelevant.
Mhm.
Singing is irrelevant. Dancing is irrelevant.
Right.
But you know what the final result should be. It should be a number. It shouldn't be the best picture ever made of a platypus or whatever. Right?
Mhm.
It has to be. So that's a well-defined problem. You've got your initial your representation of the initial state, the goal state, the operators are all helpful. They're clear. They're interdefining. You go, yes, right? Now, the problem we have is that a lot of our education was giving us well-defined problems. So we came to think that most of what life's problems are well-defined problems.
Right.
I'm getting back to consciousness. Give me a sec. But most real-world problems are ill-defined problems.
That's right.
Let me give you an example. We're doing it right now. Have a good conversation. What's the initial state? We're silent. What should we say? Well, crucial, important, relevant thing. Great. Right? Or, right, go on a successful first date with somebody. That's a really ill-defined problem.
Yeah.
Right? Tell a joke. Okay. So the point is, these problems are ill-defined. So we can come into situations where we're hitting ill-defined problems. And if they're novel in being ill-defined for us, right, or at least there's some aspect of their lack of definitiveness for us is novel.
Yeah.
We also confront complexity because we don't know, right? We're starting to open up and we're starting to bleed into that combinatorially explosive space.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
And so intelligence is trying to make things relevant. And then what it does is all your unconscious intelligence, this is a simplistic story, but it's sort of the gist of the truth. What it does is it passes that initial pass of what's relevant to working memory. And then working memory does a higher order evaluation of, right, what of these are relevant right now because of this ill-defined problem that I'm facing. And then it directs your attention to what it is deeming relevant in this moment because of the novelty, the ill-definedness, the complexity. That's consciousness.
Interesting.